Welcome back to Rooted Sacred Part 2 of How a Woman with No Peace Chose Life. So, at the end of Part 1, I left off on how and what made me start my descent into spirituality. Because I always grew up in church, I always grew up in spirituality of some essence, right? As most people. However, um, Christianity and religion it did not work for me. So, I started reading a book, Mystics Across the King's River by Mr. James Weeks in mm, I want to say 2016. No, 20, the end of 2017, I started reading that book. And I continued to read that book through 2018. In 2018, I had started declining physically. My body was rebelling. My body was crying out for help. I had been to the doctors over 100 times. Nobody could tell me what was wrong. Um, I had locks. My locks was thinning. They were breaking. And I knew something was wrong because my hair went from being lush and bouncy and big curls to thin baby locks, and they were breaking and snapping. And I was like, something's wrong. But every time I brought it up to my doctor, they were like, no, you got high blood pressure, you got this, you got that. And at one point, I was on over 100 different medications that included 10 different high blood pressure pills, um, pills for heart disease. I had a pill for kidney disease. I had a pill to help my liver um, flush out and function. I had so many pills. I was like a walking pharmacy, and I was just like none of it. But again, nobody knew anything that I was going through unless I told you. I went to work every single day. I worked nonstop. I worked from sunup to sundown. I took care of my children who were involved in sports of every kind. You name it, they were in it, and I was present for that. I was also married. So I didn't have time to sit down and focus on the fact that I'm ill. I had to get up and move and be a functioning person. In the midst of all of this, I lost my grandmother, my mother's mother. And I had not processed that. And after we put her in the ground in her final resting place, I I struggled. I struggled for a very long time, and I came home. I just remember coming home after I went to the funeral, and I said I wasn't gonna go, but my grandmother wouldn't have had it any other way. I had to go. So I left work, still dressed in my work clothes, to go to the funeral. And um, when I got there, I did what I always did. As being the eldest of 8 girls, I stepped in and started taking care of stuff. My mother was falling apart, my aunts were falling apart, and I had to step in and take care of my sisters, take care of my mother, because that was my responsibility. Or so I told myself. That's what I told myself. So that's what I did. And then we went to the gravesite, and that was by far the most, that's hard. And I watched my mother's siblings just at the plum fool, but I watched my mother, and she's the oldest, and I watched her and how she broke down as they were lowering my grandmother into the ground. And all I could do was step in to take care of her. That was my job. That was my only job, to take care of her and my siblings. And everybody else wants to talk, and please stop talking to me. That's how I was. Just don't talk to me. Let me do what I'm doing, please. And I just kept telling myself, my grandmother's not in there. Her body is in there, but she's not there. And that's how I made it through, because I kept saying she's not in there. The essence of who she is isn't in that box. The avatar in which she walked around on this earth is in that box, but she's not in that box. That's what I told myself to get through. And so, um, ooh, that's hard. But I made it through that, all the while still dealing with everything that I was going through. And so, October of 2018, mind you, I'm still a store manager at a very popular grocery store. And this particular day, I was at work at 3 a.m. Because I had to open the store. I had an employee that called off. So that left me and one other employee. So I had to go in early and get a start on opening my store. But I didn't feel good this day. And my legs had swollen. Like I was, if anybody's from the South, we got those aunties with those big old legs and no knees. That was me. Like my legs were so swollen to the point where I couldn't see my knees, I couldn't see my ankles, and my feet would not fit inside of my shoes. And if you know about working in grocery stores or any place that requires that you have steel toe boots, you understand that they are already hard to walk in. But try walking in them with swollen feet. Yeah, that's not comfortable. So I took me some shoes that I could slide on. They were a pair of house shoes. And so I took those to work. I put those on, and I'm going through the store. I'm doing everything, and then I got lightheaded, and I sat down on the floor right where I was because I couldn't move, and I was just like, if anything happens to me in this store, nobody's going to know I'm in here because it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm in here by myself. My other employee hadn't shown up yet, and so I was just like, I'm gonna be hit if something happens. And so I just remember saying, God, please just let me make it. Please just let me make it. Let me make it until my employee shows up. And thankfully enough, they showed up at around 5 a.m. And I sat on the floor the entire time until they got there. And we got everything done, got the store opened on time. And I called one of my other supervisors and I'm like, hey, can you please come in and take over? I cannot function, can't work. And so I just remembering I can't drive home because my legs are swollen to the point where I can't stand on them. So I ended up having to go to the hospital. And they're looking at me like, are you crazy? And I'm like, I had to go to work. It wasn't like this until I started walking around and moving around. And they couldn't find any answers. The only thing that they kept saying was, you're bleeding internally. And we don't know where the source of the blood is coming from. So they're doing all of these tests. Everything's coming back normal. Everything's coming back in normal range. They're like, we can't tell you why you're bleeding internally. And so I was like, well, what do I do? What's my recourse? How do I get some kind of relief? And so they were just like, we're gonna put you into the hospital. Um, we're gonna put you on some blood thinners. They put me on so much different stuff. Just, I was asleep the majority of the time. That's where I was, sleep. Once they started giving me all those different medications and medications for pain, I went to sleep because I was just like, I don't know. But they still didn't have any answers. And so I had my book, Mystics Across the Kings River, and I'm laying there and I'm reading and I'm taking notes and I'm making notes. And come across the chapter where he talks about the moment he discovered his forever. And so I started reading it. And he talks about going to sit at the water's edge and how he met the woman at the water's edge. And this was his first encounter with Yemoja. And if anybody in a spirit in the spiritual world who knows anything about Ifa, um, then you know about Yemoja. If you don't, you can Google her, read about her, learn about her. But for us that do know about her, she's the one that we go to when life gets heavy, when things just don't make sense, when you need a motherly energy to comfort you. That's what Yemoja does. And so he found comfort in her. And he just started talking about how everything he was going through is seen to melt away on the water's edge. And so I said, this must be it. This must be it. This must be the answer because nothing else is making sense. And so I started Googling while I was laying there in the hospital bed. I was in the hospital for like 2 weeks. I'm laying there and I'm Googling about Yemoja. And, they talk about her attributes. The woman who is the mother of fishes, um, and really she's the mother of all the Orishas in the pantheon. Um, but they talked about how, the woman with the big arms and the big bosom cradles you and carries you and she wraps you in her arms. And I was just like, oh my God, this is what I'm looking for. So I started digging. I started digging. And I came across a video on YouTube University. The lady was just like, if you want to know, get a reading. To learn who your head Orisha is. Again, this was before I knew anything about Ifa, knew anything about how it actually works. And when I got to that point, I started Googling on how to get a divination. And um, I remember coming across this botanica that said they offer readings. And they were in New York, and I was like, oh, I got to go to New York to get a reading. And so I sent a request for a divination. It was $100 for an hour reading. And so I remember being contacted by the gentleman. His name was Alex Onale, and he said he was going to do my reading. We set it up for, it was like a Friday evening. I remember doing it in the evening because I'm busy during the day. So um, I had worked until like 5:30 in the afternoon. Had to take my son to basketball practice, and my daughter had cheerleading practice. But I knew I was going to be home by 7:30 that evening, so we set the reading up for 8 o'clock. And so I got myself prepared. I got my notebook because he said you need a notebook, you need a pen, and so I did all of that. When we started talking, he told me, he said, um, you're going through a lot and you don't have any answers as to what it is you're looking for. And he said, your grandmother is here and she says for you to stop worrying and stop blaming yourself. And I had not told this man anything about me personally. I told him my name. I told him my mother's name. Because if you know about getting a divination, then you know that they always ask you for your name and they ask you for your mother's name. And so when he asked me those questions, I gave him that, but I didn't tell him anything about my grandmother. And he said, your grandmother is coming through very loudly. He said, your grandmother is a character. Anybody who has ever crossed my grandmother knows that she is a character. She is loud and she does not play when it comes to me. So when he said that she had taken over the conversation, he said, she wants you to know that she's proud of you, that she loves you, that she's looking out for you, and she wants you to stop blaming yourself. Because for a long time, I walked around with um, survivor's remorse. I walked around with a lot of guilt because I said it should have been me, not my grandmother. But here's the catalyst: nobody outside of my ex-husband, nobody knew that I had cancer. I didn't even know I had cancer. And then when I found out, I still didn't tell anybody. Um, But I was sick. I was sick right around the time that my grandmother was sick. But it was not time for me to go yet. It was her time because she had fulfilled her duty here on this plane. And so when he started telling me, all I could do was sit there and cry. I mean, I was bawling like a baby. I went from sitting there smiling and taking notes to crying like a full blown infant. And I just remember my ex coming in the room and I'm shooing him out like, no, just go because I want to feel this moment. I need to feel this experience. And so we got to talking about everything that I was going through. And he told me, he said, Yemoja governs your head. Oshun governs your head. You are accompanied by Shango, who is in your bloodline, and Eshu, who governs your feet. And I was like, okay. Again, he's telling me things that I don't know. I'm just being given all this information. And so I said, well, what do I do? How do I work with these um, energies? And he said, well, for Yemoja, he said, not for the other ones, but for Yemoja, you're going to set up an altar for her. And I said, well, how do I do that? What do I use? What do I do? He said, you can Google it. And I said, okay. So I got on YouTube University and I started Googling how to set up an altar. And I learned how to set up an altar. So I went and got fabric of blue and white because those were her colors. I got I got those colors. I had a desk that I had from my children when I homeschooled them. Um, I cleansed it the way that we cleanse it spiritually. I cleansed it of everything, and then I set everything up. I went to the beach and I got seashells. I got a whole big old conch shell. I got pearls. I got starfishes. I got all those things that Yemoja would like that's in the water, that's at the top of the water. I got those for her and put those on the altar. So every day I would go up to the altar and say prayers and give her offerings and light a candle for her. This was before I knew how big and how wonderful the spiritual journey was going to be. So I sat at the altar every single day, prayed, sang, lit candles, and then I would come downstairs. And then one day in particular, I remember I was on my way to work and I had forgotten to go give her her offering for the day. And I said, I got to do that before I go to work. So I'm getting dressed. And my uniform for work was black pants, a navy blue jacket, a navy blue short sleeve shirt, and I wore a black headband to put around my hair, and I had some big old steel toe black boots. And so I run upstairs to my altar because I gotta be at work in less than 20 minutes. I'm 5 minutes away. So I'm like, okay, I got time to run up there, do the offering, and then head out to work. So I do the offering, I go to work, I come home, and I'm like, oh, I take my shower, get ready for bed, and I'm like, I gotta go upstairs and check on my altar. So I go upstairs, I check on my altar, and my heart sinks. It drops. Okay, I'm like, what happened? Like I'm in full blown panic mode. Now, I said I went to work. When I went to work, I left 7 candles burning. 7 candles. Okay? In a room that's all wood. The floor, the walls, the windows, everything is wood in this room. So it could have been a catastrophe. But what I encountered, I should say, is the tablecloth is burnt. The whole spot in which Yemoja is sitting on, her statue, the seashell, because I sat her on top of the seashell with a blue bowl of coconut. I have a white bowl with candles. Everything's burnt. The white bowl is black. Her offering bowl is black. the table underneath the tablecloth is burned. Everything is burned. And I am out of my mind. I'm confused. I'm I have no words at this point. And so I dropped to my knees and I start crying. I start crying my eyes out. And so I had joined all of these different EFOG groups on Facebook. Um, and I had reached out to one of the guys who called himself a Babalawo. And I took pictures and I sent it to him, and he said, take it all down. He said, this is not right. This is not what you need to do. He said, you need to get a full blown reading, but you need to sit before the tray. And I said, well, what does sit before the tray mean? He said, you need to get a divination in person, not over the phone. I said, well, he said that she's my head Orisha. He said, that's not how you're going to figure out if that's your head Orisha. You need to go and sit before Ifa and put your head to the tray. And so I said, well, I have to plan for that. But I did what he said. I took everything down and I didn't put anything back up. Now, this is in like August of 2018. I ended up in the hospital in October of 2018 because I couldn't walk. And I go to have all these tests done and they want to put me on all these different blood coagulants because they put me on blood thinners, but now they're putting me on coagulants because my body's not responding. Okay, the blood is still pooling inside. I still can't eat. At this point, I was maybe drinking my nutrition because eating solid foods was not an option at all. So in October, the last part of October of 2018, they told me to make a follow appointment with my doctor. So I did. I made a follow appointment, and once I made that follow appointment, I went in with him, and he was just like, I can't explain this. He said, it's not making sense. He said, your blood pressure is through the roof. He said, at this point, you should be having a stroke. And he was like, do you have a headache? I was like, I got a headache that's become my best friend. I was walking around with a headache for like 70 years of a consistent headache. And it was just like, this is not normal. Now, my doctor, I had been with him since I was 18. Um, and so uh, he knew everything about me. Um, the only thing he didn't do was deliver my babies because he couldn't do that. But I stayed with him after I had my children. So, you know, I had been with him my entire adulthood. But when he said that he didn't know what was making me sick, I said, I need some different answers because this is not making any sense to me. And you can't give me the answers. And I will tell any black woman, get you a black doctor and preferably a woman doctor because they can't tell us about our bodies. I walked around for years not knowing that I had this illness inside my body that was getting ready to get worse. And no one could help me. No one could help me. No one had answers. No one knew anything. No one even bothered to dig in. Like I had so many tests. At one point, they were just like, we can't use the veins in your arms anymore. They're busted. So they were using my down by my ankles or the tops of my feet because they had used up all my vein space to get blood. And I jokingly said, well, at this point, you might as well just go ahead and stick a needle in my leg and just take the blood that way because it's pooling inside of me. And although it might not seem funny, to me it was funny. Because laughter was the only thing that kept me going through what I was going through. So I told him, I said, please refer me to a black doctor, and preferably, no, I did not ask for a black doctor at that point. I asked for a female doctor. So he sent me over to this um, East Asian doctor, and she was good, but she still could not find uh, what was wrong with me. She gave me, she was the one that found out that I had pulmonary high blood pressure. As being born a preemie, I was born a preemie and I was less than a pound. So I stayed in the hospital for like 2 years until I was 2 years old. Um, and so my veins in my heart are narrow and they're tiny. So when my blood starts pumping, it doesn't pump the way it's supposed to. So it mimics high blood pressure. So she was the one that found that. And then she added to my already cabinet of medications. So um, I was just like, I mean, well, this will help. And she said, well, how long have you had the headache? And I told her, and she was like, there's no way that you walked around. I think my blood pressure was like, I think the highest it got was 298 over like 167. I should not be here. Okay. I'm just going to say it like that. It should not be funny, but I'm grateful for the journey that I did have. And so, she was like, that's not normal. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Because everything they told me to do, I'm doing it, but it's not working. And so she said, well, I'll get down to the bottom of it. So she ordered a whole lot of tests. She tested for everything, and everything came back negative. Everything came back negative. And so I remember going home from that doctor's appointment, and I was like, I need answers. So I got to Googling, because remember I said the guy told me that I need to go sit before the tray. So I started Googling, and when I found Babalao, he was in Chicago. And so I was like, this is what I need. And so I remember calling him and setting up an appointment with him to come to Chicago. That's going to be in part 3. Thank you